Welcome to the Attorney Post, your source for inside baseball talk about the legal field with the top attorneys in the country. Here's your host, Justin West.
All right, and I think we're live. Hello, guys and gals. Welcome to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with attorneys that are at the top of their game. I've got with me today Ingrid Evans of the a law firm that bears her name, the Evans Law Firm, evanslaw.com. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting scenario that comes up a lot and it's coming up a lot more frequently these days. And it's elder abuse, particularly elder financial abuse and financial fraud. She's got a lot of insight into this area, so I'm really looking forward to talking about this with her. We're going to talk to her in a minute. First off, as always, let's just take a look at her website. You can visit her site at evanslaw.com, and this is her information here. And then before we be going here, we're going to go ahead and jump into a word from one of our sponsors. And our first sponsor today is going to be Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers. And this is their site. Rocket SEO. Are you a business owner who knows that being on page one of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with an SEO company because you know that SEO is both expensive and slow? Well, not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page one of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. National media campaigns that rank instantly boost your website's ranking in Google in less than 1 week with a super simple system that leverages the power of major media companies and network affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox all across the United States. And what this does is it basically puts you on page one because you're using the power of brands, and Google loves brands. They're vetted, they're trusted, and Google automatically sees the news media as credible. So as soon as we get you into the news media, you are up on page one of Google. To learn more, visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. That's hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket to learn more about Rocket SEO. And there we go. All right. Well, I am joined here with Ingrid. Ingrid, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing good. I like the art on the wall behind you. I'm actually taking use of one of Zoom's features. Our regular listeners know I'm in the process of moving, and so my background right now is very chaotic. So I swore I would never use one of these fake backdrops, but it's all just a big mess behind me right now. But I like the art behind you. That's really nice. Well, Ingrid is an experienced litigator. She does jury trials in state and federal courts out there in California. She has expertise in diverse areas of law, including personal injury, elder financial abuse, representation of public entities in complex cases, whistleblower and consumer fraud protection, class action suits. She's licensed to practice law in New York City, Washington, D.C., and California. She's been admitted to multiple federal courts. She's board certified for civil trial advocate and civil pretrial practice by the advocate or by the National Board of Trial Advocacy. She was selected as a finalist for the 2009, 2012, and 2015 California Consumer Attorney of the Year. She was named one of the 2009 Rising Stars by Northern California Super Lawyers, and 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017 Northern California Super Lawyer. Top Women's Attorney, Northern California 2012 Super Lawyers as well, and a lot more. So she has a one heck of a pedigree coming to us today. So Ingrid, first question as always, what did I miss?
I think you got it there. I can talk a little bit about my financial elder abuse background. I kind of fell into it about 20 years ago. I was at the city attorney's office in San Francisco as a deputy city attorney, and I was asked to handle the first elder financial abuse case that they brought there. And that's how I fell in love with protecting seniors and bringing cases where I can do good to help people.
That's awesome. It's definitely something that's very, very necessary in this day and age. I know that more and more, probably 100 years ago, it was much more common for grandparents to live with a family or to live very close. I know a lot of houses are still sold with a mother-in-law's cabin attached to them, in fact. But of course, nowadays, I know that it's far more common for our elderly parents to wind up in some sort of a nursing home or nursing facility, or to have people coming into the home and taking care of them. I'm actually, my mother is getting older as well. My stepfather passed away just last month, and so now she's on her own, and she's getting older, and it's harder for her to move around. So it is something that even in my life has been something that I've been considering a lot more lately and trying to figure out what's going to be the best option. So obviously we know that abuse happens. I've talked to multiple attorneys, including personal injury attorneys, that deal with all sorts of physical abuse of elders. But obviously there's other aspects of abuse as well. And so one of the things that you seem to function on or focus on a lot is financial aspects of elder abuse. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about what kinds of financial abuse the elderly are oftentimes subject to?
Well, in California, we have so many seniors and it's just prevalent everywhere. What I see in abundance of is I see a lot of caretaker fraud. So you have a caretaker, somebody coming into your house to take care of the elderly person, and they slowly kind of get involved in their lives and take over and get power of attorney for healthcare and then power of attorney for finances. They get the deed to the house. I see a lot of that. And so that's a big area that I like to focus on because I can help fix it and get them their life back. I also see a lot of power of attorney abuse where somebody becomes the power of attorney and takes advantage, and often there's an overlap between the caretaker fraud and the power of attorney abuse. I also take on a lot of insurance cases where I go after insurance companies that have sold inappropriate financial products and insurance to seniors, such as a deferred annuity that maybe is locking up their money for a long period of time and makes no sense to put someone who's 80 or 90 years old into.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of this caretaker fraud. That's actually something I'm kind of fascinated by. Obviously, mom, dad, maybe one of them's passed away, one of them is living in their home. They can't, they need some assistance. They get a caretaker to come live with them. Maybe they already had a will written out, but in the process of having this person taking care of them on a regular basis, something happens where they sign over power of attorney. How does that happen? What are the steps that people should be on the lookout to say, oh, this is happening, it shouldn't happen? And what can people do once it's happened?
Okay, so here are the red flags to watch out for. First of all, if you have somebody who doesn't have family that's close, an elderly person, they need to be very careful and get somebody they trust to kind of check in on them and make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, especially if they have a lot of assets. Everybody in California who owns a house, has significant assets. So, that's a prominent and prevalent thing in California. You have to be careful about letting them be too involved in your life. So if they're coming in to take care of you, they should be taking care of you. That means feeding you, helping you with any medical issues. It does not mean getting a power of attorney to make your important medical decisions all the times. It does not mean getting a financial power of attorney, especially, and it does not mean rewriting your will and trust or getting the deed to your house. That you are paying this person and that is sufficient compensation for them. You don't owe them anything more than that. And what happens is a lot of times the caretaker comes in and then slowly takes over all aspects of their life, isolates them, manipulates them, and then it's called undue influence in California, where they slowly kind of take over everything. And we need to be on the lookout for that. So if this is your parent that has a caretaker, you should be regularly checking in, making sure that they're not giving power of attorney to anybody, especially for finances, making sure that they're not letting a caretaker become a joint owner on any type of assets or bank accounts, statements. So you got to be really careful about that. So check in regularly. If you don't have families and you're an elder that you're really close with or that you trust, you can get what's called a fiduciary, who is a licensed and bonded person to help you with your bill writing and checks and bank accounts, and that person is insured. So if they do something bad, which does happen, but it's more rare, I would say, they are bonded and insured, so you can go after them for that. A lot of times the people that come in and take over people's assets have nothing, and then once they take your assets, it's very difficult to get them back.
So the elders that find themselves in these situations, is it, and I'm sure that it's going to vary a little bit from case to case, do they oftentimes feel almost trapped, as if, if they don't give this power of attorney, they're going to not be able to see their family again? Or is it more of a, I don't know the best word to use, but a grift, where they almost come in as a friendly, like a con job, and they befriend the person and let them know that, oh, I only have your best interests in mind. And before you know it, they've got the power of attorney and all of these other aspects that they're managing all of a sudden.
Yeah, it runs the gamut. So what I've seen is, yes, sometimes they come in And they know from the outset that they're going to be trying to take advantage of this senior, the caretaker, that is, okay? And they have a clear plan, and they slowly get on the accounts. They, I've seen people set up, Amazon accounts where they're starting to get packages. I saw one caretaker set up a storage unit, and she would just have things shipped to her house, and the elder would pay for everything. So it does run the gamut. And then you have some people where, they come in and maybe they slowly honestly do become friends with them, but it's not appropriate for the caretaker. And there's very specific laws in California that you should not be overstepping your role. And if you are, it's called a presumption of undue influence and fraud. If you are overstepping your role, and if you are trying to get that person that you're taking care of to give you all of their assets, that's problematic in California, and it should be everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I have a parent and I suspect this has gone on, what are my legal rights? And I'm assuming it's going to vary a little bit from state to state. Obviously, I'm in Kansas, so I probably wouldn't be working with you. But I imagine some of the steps would be the same. What should we, the American people, do if we find that one of our parents is suffering from elder abuse?
Okay, well, the first thing is to talk to them. So if they're competent, so you want to find out, if the caretaker has had them sign anything, if they've had them put a power of attorney in place, if they've had them change their estate plan. Sometimes the elder is so manipulated by the caretaker, they don't want to talk about it. So in that case, you need to do a little due diligence yourself. If you have a power of attorney for your parent, you can check their accounts. But the best course is always to talk to them first. But if your suspicions are rising and you have concerns, probably it's for a good reason, and you should look into it and try to figure that out. If your parent is not competent, and if you do not have power of attorney, and if the caretaker does not have power of attorney, but you suspect they've done something bad, you may have to get what's called a conservatorship. I don't love conservatorships. It takes away the rights of the individuals, but sometimes you have to do that. So it's very important before your parent gets into that situation to make sure that you have the appropriate powers of attorney in place so you can help them, and that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg down the road to get a conservatorship just to help them. So if you already have healthcare power of attorney, a durable healthcare, or a financial power of attorney, you can help them when you need to, and you can look into these things that you're suspicious about. And a lot of times they don't even know what's going on. So they don't even know, they don't get their bank account statements anymore, and they just don't know that they've had a caregiver added to their account. So you can just go in and start looking, and if you see spending habits that don't look like your parents, like $15,000 bills to Nordstrom's, there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not unusual.
Oh, that's expensive. So I have like 8 questions all of a sudden that are coming up, and I want to get to all of them here. Okay, first off, how bad can this get? What's the worst case scenario? What's the worst that you've seen?
Okay, so I had a situation a couple of years ago. I've resolved the case, but unfortunately, the man he died, and he was over medicated and drugged by the caretaker. He had millions of dollars. The caretaker did this first to his uncle, who was in his 90s, married him, took all of his assets, took care of him until he died. But in the meantime, she got on his will, his trust, power of attorney, took all of his assets. Then he passed away, and then she went after the nephew. When he became incapacitated, she was obviously older at this time too, but she did the same thing. And then I think in that situation, she got greedy, really greedy, and I think she actually killed him. And wow. So that was the most horrible case I've dealt with. We were able to get back all of the assets for the family, but I can't bring somebody back who's been murdered.
No, absolutely not. So you said that she married the uncle. Would that have been almost a forced marriage? Like he wasn't fully competent of what was going on?
I believe so. And same thing with the
wow.
The other, she actually had the nephew. He had back surgery and he was overly medicated, and he had a stroke. And she had a trust prepared and brought it to him 15 minutes after he had a stroke, waited to call 911 and was having him try to sign it. And the man couldn't sign. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't even remember his name. So, that was an example of something pretty horrific.
Wow. No, that is terrible.
Yeah.
Goodness.
And she's still out there, so be careful.
Oh, well, if anyone has a caretaker suddenly marrying their family, reach out to Ingrid and we'll make sure that it's not the same person.
Right.
Um, so power of attorney it seems like it might be kind of a what's the word I'm looking for, like stopgap or something that can potentially prevent this from happening. If you have a parent that's getting older, would it make sense for most people just to pursue that early on before the parents need it, before anything has happened, just as a just in caser? And in families, would it make sense for just one kid to do this, or would multiple children, if there's siblings, make more sense? Or is that looking at power of attorney the wrong way?
No, I think that's it's the right way to look at it, but I can tell you about some of the problems that come up. So what I always recommend with families is to get your siblings on board. So if you have a close family, everybody should be involved in the decisions with your family. Hopefully you don't have sibling rivalry, because I have seen some abuse take place with sibling rivalry. You want to make sure that you have a joint power of attorney. I always recommend that. If there's multiple siblings, I like to see all of them involved in there, so one person can't take advantage. And so, fortunately, I don't see that too often, but I have seen it where one sibling will take advantage and then they'll become the abuser and the other siblings have to go after them. I personally like to go after caregivers as opposed to family members, because family members should stick together and support themselves. So you can prevent some of this from happening if you were involved and help your parents and talk about things, but you can't always. So powers of attorney are pretty easy to revoke. And, smart caregivers seem to know that you can go and have a new power of attorney set up. If the person is incompetent when they do that, we can challenge it and say that that power of attorney should never have been put in place.
Gotcha. And so in that situation, then it's really you making the argument to the court that shows that the actions of the caregiver who's taken over power of attorney should never have happened. And as long as you can show that, it generally begins the process of unraveling the damage, would you say?
It does. It does. And if we can show that their will and trust and power of the attorney that was created by the caretaker deviates significantly from what they had done in the past. So, for instance, your mom and dad, they have the West Trust or the West Will, right? And that was put in place, let's say in 1995, and they haven't changed that for years, right? And then caregiver suddenly comes into place in 2021 and changes everything and makes it dramatically different so that everything goes to the caretaker rather than Justin and his siblings, right? That we can show a substantial deviation from what the intent was of the elders.
So here's a weird hypothetical, but what happens if maybe the elder feels betrayed by their own children, and maybe they do actually feel like this caregiver is the only person that cares for them, and maybe they even freely make a decision like to give some or even all of the inheritance to a caregiver? Does it ever even happen? Is that merely just a weird head experiment? Does it happen sometimes? Is that something that kids can fight? And if they're fighting, are they actually thwarting the will of their parents or not? How do you judge those sorts of things? That's kind of a weird question, but
no, it's a great question, and it happens all the time. Okay. And so what does happen sometimes is, the elder is maybe losing confidence when they become elderly, or maybe they have early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, and they do become subject to this undue influence and manipulation by the caregivers. So it may be that suddenly mom thinks that her best friend is his caregiver. And I see it often with men as well, elderly men. They get, buttered up by a woman caretaker who's younger. And sometimes they even end up marrying them and doing inappropriate sexual things to garner favor with the elder, which is really hideous. But this happens all the time. And so the family needs to be aware of it. If you feel like the caregiver is getting too close, manipulating, isolating, not allowing you to talk to your parent, get rid of them. Just find a new caregiver, somebody who is licensed and bonded and insured. The other thing you can do is get a professional fiduciary involved. So if your parents, for instance, don't necessarily trust all the siblings to get along and make good decisions, you can get a licensed and bonded fiduciary to come help with either medical care, get a case manager who can handle all the medical decisions, or financial issues. And then that way you don't have the siblings fighting over issues.
I've heard a lot of stories of families just dissolving over what happens to the house, when mom and dad die. So obviously I think this would add all kinds of layers of stress and frustration if the house that everyone thought that they were going to get winds up going to the caretaker. I'm assuming this happens a lot more common with live-in caretakers than it does say at an actual nursing home, but I would assume this probably could still happen at a nursing home as well. Does it happen that way very often, or
it does happen that way often. And let me tell you, the situation I was talking about earlier, where the man that his family that I represented, who was over medicated and murdered by the caregiver, she started off in an assisted living facility as his caretaker there, met the elderly man that she first married there and took him out of the facility. Okay,
wow.
so it does happen. She was a predator. She was looking to find a rich elderly man to help her and her family.
Wow. It's an interesting aspect of human life, and the thinking of preying on the elderly like that. I mean, I've known I think the elderly are a really good mark for a lot of people, because at the end of your life is usually when you have the most money, if you're ever going to have it. You've had your whole life to collect, so if you've had enough time, you wind up with the most amount of fundage. So it's easy, I guess, to siphon off there. But the fact that people do this and take advantage of people that are not, especially not fully competent, not fully with it, that's just that makes me sad.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And what I often see too is sometimes, one of the spouses will die, and then the other one is left and they're kind of lost, and then they're even more vulnerable to this type of manipulation and undue influence by a caregiver.
Gotcha. You mentioned the conservatorship. What exactly does that entail?
Oh, conservatorships are very expensive, first of all, and they take away someone's rights. If you don't have a power of attorney in place for healthcare or finances, and you become incompetent, let's say you get COVID and you need someone to help you in the hospital, and you're in the hospital for 6 months, okay? You don't have that. You potentially have to have a conservatorship, and that's not what we want to see. Conservatorships are not something that I like. Sometimes they're necessary, but they take away all of the individual's rights. And then what you have in that situation is a petition that gets filed with the court, and then the conservatee, the elderly victim, they have an attorney, the conservator has an attorney. So there's a lot of attorneys involved, and it becomes very messy at times.
Man. So you mentioned COVID a minute ago, obviously just as an incidental thing that could happen, but I imagine you tend to deal with the elderly a fair amount. Has the last year or so changed what you do in your practice at all, or has it been mostly standard for you? How has COVID affected you?
I would say we've been busier, even more, and we're always busy, but it's just this last year has been one emergency after another, and it's with financial abuse, but I also get calls on nursing home issues. I've had calls with people who had problems with all sorts of, COVID related issues. And so, sometimes we'll take on those cases, or I will refer you out to a lawyer I know that handles those cases. But it's just been a busy year, and I think family have been isolated. So it's been a potential for abuse just because of the isolation that these seniors are facing.
Yeah, that's really oof. It's been a weird year. It's been a weird year for everyone, and I'm sure if you're dealing with the elderly, it's even just more situations. I've talked to a lot of attorneys that say they're moving a lot of what they do online. They're doing a lot more things digitally. I imagine that the group of people that would have the hardest time making that adjustment might be the elderly. I don't know if that affects you at all, or if you tend to be dealing with slightly younger, more tech savvy children of the elderly, your boomers and younger, your Gen Xers and whatnot. Has that posed any challenges to what you do, or has it all been pretty smooth sailing?
Pretty smooth sailing. I would say the people that usually contact us, though, are people who are younger, usually the kids that have computer access, internet access. Although, I've had folks that are in their 80s and 90s contact us. And in fact, I had a woman 99 years old call us today. So, everybody seems to be out there, looking out for seniors and trying to protect them. So that's a good thing. I do notice, and this is kind of interesting, that around the holidays is when we get the busiest. So I don't know if family gets more involved, and then they notice things that are going on with their family, and problems, but it becomes crazy around the holidays.
That's interesting. And actually that feeds into something else that somebody had said the other day. Somebody was explaining generally flu season spikes in like January, February, and then tapers off. And, people just thought, well, it's the coldest time and people are more indoors and everything else. And somebody said they wondered if it wasn't more readily explainable by the fact that in general, people tend to get together for the holidays. And so you have, especially if you have people that living in very vastly different areas of the country, and all of a sudden they're all bringing their own petri dishes of contamination together, you would see these spikes in illness rates, because all of a sudden everyone's bringing new germs that other people haven't been exposed to, and so you see this sudden spike. Usually with a trailer, because of course it takes time for infection to actually hit. And they wondered if this wasn't going to be the case with COVID and the holidays as well. But I'm wondering if that is the case. You would have people getting together at the holidays, and maybe that is the time that they see mom and dad, and they realize, oh, things really have gotten bad since last year when we saw them at Thanksgiving or Easter or whenever it happened to be the last time that they got together. That's interesting though, that would follow that pattern. I wonder if that's the basis of that pattern. If anyone in the comments has any thoughts on that, feel free to leave it down below if you think that makes sense, or if you've got an alternate explanation. So what would you say then? You've been doing this for how long?
Well, I've been practicing 26 years, and I've been doing elder financial abuse for over 20 years.
Over 20 years. So 20 years is a long time in any career, especially dedicated to one particular thing. And that's awesome. You've been able to do it for so long. I'm sure, especially early on, you made a few mistakes here and there. Everybody does, or at least something you thought was a minor importance wound up being a much more major issue. What's one time in your career that maybe you experienced a failure or a setback, and what did you learn from that?
Okay, yeah, I have been there.
Twist the arm.
What I have learned is, if you take a case, whenever I take a case, it's because I believe in the client. I believe what they're telling me. And when I learn that they have maybe lied to me or demonstrate kind of a personality trait that's not really likable, that is not somebody that I want to be representing. So I have learned that if you learn early on that somebody has lied to you, that needs to be the end of the relationship. And one of the things actually I love about representing seniors is they are very, very, in general, a very honest group of people, way more so than the younger generations. So I have found that it's very rare in the cases that I've had for the seniors to be liars. In fact, sometimes they hurt their case because they are so honest. And that is, great. I'd rather have that than the alternative.
That's true. Do you think that's because they were raised differently? Do you think that's because just at the end of their life, they care less about what people think? I
think there is, I think both. Yeah, I think raised differently, different values, and also just no filter. They say what they think. And I love that.
Yeah. I think we all look forward to a time when we can just be truthful. So on the flip side of that coin then, tell us about one of your biggest wins. Tell us about a time that things just went smashingly well and you're like, wow, we just recovered X for somebody, or I thought Y was going to happen, but really Z is what happened. And that was the best possible scenario that we could only hope and pray for. Tell us a time in your career when you had one of those amazing wins.
Oh, well, there are so many cases I've had that I've been proud of, and I've had a lot of good results. But I think every case has its challenges. There's no such thing as a perfect case. So even the cases that I'm really proud of, I would say the cases that I was nominated for Consumer Attorney of the Year in California, that's a huge award. That's something I'm really proud of. I helped do some really big cases when I was at the city attorney's office, and those went on to get some really big consumer protection results and verdicts. I was very proud of those.
What kind of verdicts did you get? If you're able to talk about it.
It's not something that I like to go into. I think that's it's just
we'll respect the attorney-client privilege there. That's totally fine. I just didn't know if you could hint at the sorts of things. That's totally fine. So what do you do then to stay on top of your game? What do you do? Where do you go to stay on the cutting edge of elder law and financial abuse?
I give a lot of talks. I talk to other lawyers. I'm on listservs. I consult with them. I'm giving a talk after this for Canada, California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. We're doing a webinar on elder financial abuse and teaching other lawyers on those topics. But I also learn from the other lawyers that I work with. And so when we give these presentations, I think it's a great way to brainstorm about strategy and what works and what counties are different and what you do in different counties and how you approach the cases.
You've done a number of webinars, it sounds like, on this topic, or you've done some speaking. Is there somewhere people can go online to find some of your information that you've presented other than your website, or is there a specific spot on your website?
Yeah, I think if you go onto the website, evanslaw.com, I think we have a press section, and it talks about IME, which is Ingrid M. Evans in the news. And then there's a bunch of resources under that tab there. You can see news, Ingrid M. Evans in the news, and then it talks about some of the things I've done. Also, if you go just to my CV, my bio on the website, you can pull that up, and that goes on and on and on about some of the things I've done. If you scroll down, and a lot of it was stuff that you covered. It looks like I need to update it, though. I'm looking at it. And a lot of the articles and press pieces that I'm seeing are from 2012 and 2013. I need to updated with things for 2015 on, but there has been a lot. And so
There's definitely a lot there.
My CV, I think, is over 10 pages long at this point. So for me to go into it would be a lot.
It's like, okay, now you're just bragging. Come on.
This is why we don't like lawyers.
Well, that's awesome. And it's good to know that you have these resources available where people can kind of learn a little bit more about the various facets of this case, or of the cases that you deal with. In a minute, I want to ask you a couple more questions, including what do you think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people have when it comes to dealing with elder abuse and elder financial abuse. Before I do that, though, I'm going to go over and read from our second sponsor here. And of course, our second sponsor today is injuryattorneyleads.com. Personal injury attorneys spend a lot of time and money advertising, but it's difficult to get qualified leads. You're paying for leads that are not qualified, or worse, you're getting leads from the internet that are no longer interested in talking to a lawyer if you even get a hold of them at all. These leads can cost between $100 and $500 a piece, and you can burn through 5 to 10 of them just to get one prospective client on the phone. The solution is injuryattorneyleads.com. Injuryattorneyleads.com will live transfer people directly to your law firm who've been in an accident and who want to talk to a lawyer about their case. You can be sure that these potential clients meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and the close rates average 60%. Set up a time to talk with a client generation specialist by visiting injuryattorneyleads.com and scheduling a time to talk. That's injuryattorneyleads.com. All right. So, Ingrid, let me ask you, I talk to lots of attorneys all the time, and everyone gets a lot of common questions that people bring to them that usually, belie a misunderstanding of something in the law. So what is a common misunderstanding that people have when it comes to protecting their family, especially in the case of something like fraud?
A lot of people think that they can only get a lawyer if they hire them on an hourly basis, and not all lawyers are like that. So a lot of the cases I do, especially the caretaker fraud cases and the insurance cases where I go after insurance companies or insurance agents, are done on a contingency. And I only take the case if I think it's a great case, because it's a lot of risk. I'm not getting paid unless I win the case. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important because if a lawyer takes a case on a contingency, it means they have a lot of faith in the facts of that case and in the law. And you can get a lawyer to do anything for an hourly rate, a lot of lawyers anyway. And I don't necessarily think that means you've got a great case. So mm-hmm. It's not to say that hourly lawyers or contingency lawyers are better, but it just, if you have a big case and somebody won't take it on a contingency, it means you've got some problems.
That's an interesting yellow flag to be on the lookout. I've heard some people say something similar to that before, but maybe not quite as direct. So that's maybe good life advice for our listeners to be paying attention to. Well, let me ask you this. You do go in on your site a fair amount to why choosing a board certified attorney is important. Can you tell us a little bit about what a board certified attorney is versus a regular attorney, and why you think it's so important?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm certified by the National Board of Trial Advocates. And so what that means is that I had to take an examination on various topics to get certified on those. And I have to answer questions every year, and I have to renew that license every year, or that certification every year. And so it just means that I have a certain expertise or knowledge base that maybe other attorneys don't have. I do think it's important, if you're going to hire a trial lawyer, that your trial lawyer has experience, and these certifications are one area of proving that you have certification and knowledge in a certain area, but also asking them, have you done a trial? Have you done a jury trial? Have you done a bench trial? How many? I think that's important.
What's your win ratio?
Yeah, that helps too, sure.
Those are probably important questions to ask. Oh, so let me ask you, here's a fun question. I did mention I might ask you the fun question. So this was suggested by some of our listeners, and it goes like this. You experience, I'm sure, lots of setbacks, lots of frustrations in your day-to-day life. Feel free to let us know a little bit about what those frustrations are and how they affect you or how they affect your clients. But if you had a magic wand that could change the one aspect of the law that affects you or your clients directly, what would you change?
I would, California has wonderful laws for elder abuse protection, but they're not perfect. And so I would wave that wand, and I would make it easier for people to be protected. So, maybe make the standard for financial abuse or for nursing home abuse, lower that standard to make sure it's a preponderance across the board, not clear and convincing. I would fix that. I would also make sure that attorney's fees are allowed in cases, because I think that is a way to incentivize lawyers to take on the cases so you don't have to pay them hourly. I think that's a great thing to fix, but that is allowed in California under financial abuse cases. Attorney's fees are mandatory, and I think that's important. If you've got a protected class of people, let's make sure that the lawyers that are protecting them are compensated adequately to take on these risky cases.
That's good. So what's the one thing you wish you would have known from the get-go when you began your career that you know now that you didn't know then?
Oh, gosh, so many things. So many things.
All of the experience.
It's a hard career, but it's really rewarding. And I think the most important thing to look at is, do you love what you do? And for me, it was really important to be helping people and to be helping the underdog. And so I'm so happy that I followed my heart and my passion, and I picked an area of law that I know that I can make a difference and I can restore justice to these folks. But I see a lot of lawyers that go into to law school, or they go into the law and they go work at a big firm, and they're disillusioned because they aren't following their passion necessarily. They're following the money, and that's not the right way to go.
That's good advice in general.
Right, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think we've had a really good discussion so far. Is there anything, any final words of wisdom that you'd like to impart? This is why I don't use the Zoom thing. I can see I'm glitching out over here. That's funny. Is there any final words of wisdom that you'd like to impart to our listeners, or any last words that you'd like to have? Because I usually like to give you the last word.
Thanks. I would just recommend stay in touch with your family, ask them questions. I don't know why people are afraid to talk to their parents about estate plans, but talk to them, make sure that they're protected. Check in with your neighbors. If you have an elderly neighbor who doesn't have family, make sure that there's nothing funny going on with them. Don't become that person, but make sure there's nothing funny going on with them, and let's look out for one another.
That was one of the questions I had earlier. So I'm gonna make you have the last word again. I'm gonna ask you another question. What do you do if it's not someone that you have direct authority over, or like a direct relationship with? So let's say it is my neighbor, and I'm like, I don't think what their caretaker is doing is right. Do you speak up in that situation? Especially if they're alone and they don't have kids, or what do you do in that scenario?
I get calls about that all the time. So speak up. Yes. First of all, talk to the elder. If you're on good terms with them, go pull them aside without the caretaker around. Say, hey, this is a red flag. Is everything okay? What are they doing? Find out if they're trying to get them to change their trust or will. If they're not competent or they're not sure what's going on, you can call Adult Protective Services in the county where they're located in California, and there's probably the equivalent in other states, but it's Adult Protective Services. And then also, if you know of actual financial abuse where somebody's actually taking money, call the police, call the district attorney. they often have a consumer protection or elder protection unit that focuses on that. So you can make anonymous calls to both of those agencies or all of those agencies, or you can make them not anonymous. So that's what I recommend doing.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Well, this has been a great conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is I just kind of get to dive into the law and dive into facets I've never really talked about before. I've talked to attorneys about physical abuse of elders before, which of course is a terrible thing as well. But I've not really looked into as much the idea of caretaker abuse. And this is maybe very fortuitous in my particular life, because again, I may be looking towards getting a caretaker, or my mother may be getting a caretaker in the not too distant future. So this has been a really good conversation. So I just want to say one more time, thank you very much for joining us here, Ingrid. And I'm going to come back over to your website really quickly and let everybody see it one more time. For those of you listening, sorry you can't see this, but of course, if you're on the video on YouTube, you can see this is evanslaw.com, named after Ingrid Evans, who is the owner and founder of Evans Law. If you're in California and you're looking for an attorney who can help you with injury, or particularly with financial injury, financial abuse, fraud, particularly elder fraud, it sounds like you couldn't do much better than working with Ingrid and her law firm. She's got a wealth of experience. And if you go to evanslaw.com, she actually has a spot right here where you can fill out your information, your name, your phone number, email, and some comments, and you can actually request a free evaluation. So if you want to know what your rights are, always, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights. That's always been my motto. And so please, if you know someone, if you're in the California area and you think that somebody may be suffering from elder abuse or financial abuse, contact a competent attorney. I highly recommend after this call today or this conversation, talking with Ingrid, but find an attorney, because if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. This is Justin West. I am the host of the Attorney Post podcast. I have been talking with Ingrid Evans of Evans Law. Thank you guys very much for listening along today. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. You can find us on podcast. You can find us on pod.co. You can find us on Google, on Apple, Stitcher. We're on all the places. So until next time, thank you guys very much. And Ingrid, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.